45. I play bass in my band Virus. Job-wise, I'm a freelance graphic designer. Virus originally formed in 1983 when I was 15. I'd had a band before that. Probably started being in bands when I was probably about 13. Never any good really until we sort of finally sort of cobbled together Virus really when we'd managed to sort of learn to play a little bit.
Yeah.
Before that we were just a complete cacophony, all the bands. Obviously when we were teenagers, you know, you start and you don't have very good equipment, and you know, we weren't particularly very proficient musicians, and we've sort of learnt to play over the years, but obviously there's still a lot to sing about that we were singing about 30 years ago, if you see what I mean. So some things have changed personally for me as I've grown older, but obviously in terms of, say, political climate, things haven't changed very much at all. The band that I was in before was a band called Nymphomania, and we'd started Nymphomania about 1982. I'd always been into music and always wanted to be in a band. Didn't really know how to play anything, but that didn't matter, you know, because that was the punk ethos. And Nymphomania was they were, I suppose, more than semi-political, but we also had a few mucking about songs like you do when you're sort of young teenage drunk punks and singing about, you know, drinking too much cider and all that sort of stuff like you do. But Virus was much more kind of serious in its political outlook. And I don't know, it's just when you're sort of 15 and in or whatever and into punk, you either kind of, I think, go down two routes. You either at that time got into the sort of crass, sort of very anarcho political punk side of thing, or you got into, say, Peter and the Test Tube Babies and Oi and all that, and sort of just had a laugh. And much as I liked lots of that sort of music, I wasn't necessarily wanting to be in a band like that. I always wanted to be in a band more like the sort of crass or Subhuman style band, if you know what I mean. If you go back to when we started, you know, gigs were great fun. They were always like in, say, skittle alleys of pubs or scout huts or village halls, you know, and you'd pay 50p to get in, and you'd have like sort of 4 or 5 slightly shambolic but great bands, you know, and you kind of always knew 1 or 2 people in the bands. Or in the bigger national scene it was quite different, but you know, you'd still go and see bands and kind of get chatting to the people in the bands. It was always very friendly. But it was a lot more violent then than it is now. I mean, there's no violence at gigs now, which is really great. You know, I mean, in terms of that, all the punk rockers are kind of older, if you know what I mean. We've all pretty much grown up. Most of the people who go to gigs are now in their 30s and 40s and even 50s. And no one's interested in having a fight, really. Everyone just wants to go to see the bands and hear what they're saying. And Virus were always an anarchist punk band. I mean, all of us were very much of the same thinking politically and ideologically, because, I mean, that's part of the reason we sort of gelled as a band. We all felt the same about whether it be, say, animal rights or vegetarianism or nuclear arms or whatever. You know, we all had the same viewpoint. So from there, we were kind of like united we stand. And I think that as the years have gone on and we've had lineup changes, you know, certain people have come to the band who not necessarily think exactly the same or completely different, but, you know, they have a slightly different angle on it, or maybe they didn't have the same kind of knowledge as, you know, myself or Dave or someone who's in the band, you know. So in terms of me changing politically, I mean, I still feel the same as I did then, and probably always will do. What was one of the biggest issues for us back then was obviously fox hunting, and particularly around this area. You know, we were very well known local hunt sabs, and we often got a bit of a hiding from the pro hunt lot, you know, and they were quite troublesome for our gigs, you know, and hence why we ended up kind of not really playing around here that much. One thing about Virus is we've had occasions where we've sort of played, say, 2 or 3 local gigs, but, you know, we don't tend to play around, say, Gillingham very much. You know, all our gigs are usually, say, Bristol or Bath or London or Birmingham or Portsmouth, Plymouth, wherever. You know, I'd like to play around here. Nowhere have us though. But going back to what you're saying, yeah, I mean, the fox hunting thing around here was very pro-hunt. It still is very pro-hunt, you know. Coming from Gillingham back then, you know, 30 years ago, Gillingham was a much smaller place, and it was real bumpkin land, if you know what I mean. It was predominantly people who'd been born and bred in Gillingham, and, you know, we were kind of the black sheep of Gillingham, you know, because of our very sort of left wing, I suppose, if you want to call it that, political stance. So gigs in Gillingham were always quite tricky. I mean, we did do that gig with the Subhumans in the Red Lion, and I'll never forget that the landlord said, "Oh, no one will come and see you lot." And then like about 300 punks turned up, and he was like, "Do you want to do another gig next week?" You know. I held about, say, nuclear weapons or animal rights or any of the things that, you know, Virus sing about are still the same now. And more people, I think, you know, when I became a vegetarian, it was 30 plus years ago, you know, you were the real oddest person in the world if you were a vegetarian. And now vegetarian is pretty mainstream now, you know. And even to the point, you know, where pubs now have vegetarian options on their menus, even for like Sunday best dinner or whatever, you know. So it's definitely, things have changed, that the things that from the counterculture's point of view have made an impact. And Greenpeace, you know, and all things like that, and environmental issues, that we were really into all that, and still are, you know, but we were quite into it back then. I suppose it's because of our surroundings. We weren't from a city, so we couldn't really sing about, you know, concrete and housing estates. We were from bumpkin land, so we were more into the green side of things, you know, green politics and stuff like that. So I think that I don't consider punk subculture, I consider it counterculture, and some of the counterculture is now becoming not counterculture, if you see what I mean.
They got you soft.